Up next, we have, excuse me, Susan Jaster coming on to talk about regenerative agriculture. Susan is a farm outreach worker, has been assisting farmers and ranchers with practical, biological, resilient solutions to agricultural issues and product marketing since 2009 for Lincoln University Cooperative Extension, Innovative Small Farmers Outreach Program, and Agribility. She is a sheep rancher who uses adaptive grazing techniques for soil health and water quality conservation.
We're going to do a little demonstration first, so
Even better, even better.
then we'll get started with sharing that screen. And hope everybody can stay awake after such an exciting keynote speaker. This is a little bit of a slower story, but what I want to talk about tonight is regenerative agriculture and why you should try it. It's a little bit different, and it helps your soil get healthier. And actually, regenerative agriculture is just about holistic farming, but there's a little extra information that you might want to know, and it helps you to become sustainable. So right now we're going to start with the flour and bread demonstration. And this will kind of help you understand the difference between conventional farming, which we're going to demonstrate with flour, and regenerative agriculture is we're going to demonstrate by using bread. So where do we get these products? Flour comes from wheat, and basically they take the wheat berry from the plant, which is the seed, and remove the bran and grind it into a fine powder. And then what is bread? Bread starts out as flour, but we add some things. We add sugar and salt and some fat and water. And then the special ingredient is yeast. And yeast is a living thing. It is so you can buy it on the shelf. It's shelf stable, so they make the yeast go dormant. And so then when water hits it, it wakes up and does its magic to make bread. So we're going to start by showing you a little demonstration here with a Rainfall Simulator. This has lots and lots of little holes poked in it. And so we're going to make it rain on the flour so that you can see what happens to soils that are degraded. And so we'll pour this water in, and we're going to just let it rain on there. And you can see the water kind of breaking away in some places. And you can also see how fast the soil deteriorates by looking at the water that has pulled the soil with it, or the flour in this case. But the flour makes the water kind of murky, and that's what happens when we have runoff. And so there's also some ponding where the water has collected on top of the soil, and there's this runoff has now created some flooding as it goes around the plate. So you might think of this as topsoil. And so if there were plants in here, the plants would be getting some water with this rain, but would they get a lot of rain? Would they get a lot of moisture? So let's just look at this by pulling back this topsoil with our spoon, and you can see that there is some moisture there, but the main thing is that you still have dry soil there. So what does that mean? When we look at the bigger picture, we know that water is not soaking into the root zone. It is only staying on top of the soil, and basically it evaporates when the sun hits it, And so we're going to have a lot of problems with our plants not getting enough moisture. So now let's look and see what happens when we add water to our bread. This is our regenerative example. And we're going to look at this by pouring some more of the water, the same amount of water in our rain simulator. And we're going to let that water soak in. And it all seems to be soaking in. We're not getting ponding or runoff. And the water is about gone. There's only a little bit here left in the cup, and I'm going to pour that off for right now. So what happens? The bread is a living thing, like our soils should be. And so it's very spongy. It holds all that moisture. And if I were to lift this up, which is pretty hard to do with bread when it's soaking wet, you get dripping. So that means the water went down into the root zone. And when the water hits the root zone, it also will go on soaking through the soil and be pulled by gravity to fill up our aquifers. And that filters and cleans the water after it hits the rock and any sediment in the soil. So that helps us have full aquifers and clean water at the same time. So I just wanted to give you that to think about. This is what's happening in so many of our soils. They are degenerated like the flour, and we want to get them to be nice and biologically active, so they're spongy and maintain and hold water when we need it, especially in a drought situation. So just to let you think about that, I'm going to come back on the screen now, and then I will share my screen with you. So what is regenerative agriculture, and why try it? Well, I hope that after you hear my talk that you will want to try it. And if you have lots of questions, I would be very pleased to answer them for you. All right, here is a definition of regenerative agriculture from the Regenerative International Organization, and the website is there in yellow. Regenerative agriculture describes farming and grazing practices that, among other benefits, reverse climate change by rebuilding soil organic matter and restoring degraded soil biodiversity, resulting in both carbon drawdown and improving the water cycle. So it's pretty important to try regenerative agriculture, at least through their description. And I'm Susan Jaster. I just wanted to let you know that I work for Lincoln University in the Cooperative Extension Department and under the Innovative Small Farmers Outreach Program. And I work in the Kansas City region, the West Central region, and I'm also a sheep rancher. So I don't really care if you don't like the term climate change, because it apparently offends a lot of people, but I wouldn't even worry about that, because we have more to talk about, and that is depleted soils. And so this is my common ground with you. I hope that we need to talk about depleted soils, which is more important to us in agriculture. So some of the things that cause depletion in soil are tillage and synthetic inputs, continuous grazing, and overgrazing. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So tillage does a lot of damage, and it has been for thousands of years. But the most important thing that we know now is that tillage wakes up the bacteria. and bacteria need food. So they begin to eat the glomalin, which is the glue that holds soil together. And we now know what glomalin is and how important it is. And it's a superbiotic glue. It holds all those little tiny particles of soil together. But when the bacteria get busy and they're awake and they're hungry, they will eat the glomalin and have a die-off, cause a die-off of glomalin, and that releases nitrate, which starts to feed those weed seeds. So if you see after you see a field after it's been tilled, or a garden after it's been tilled, suddenly we have this growth of weeds. So there's one problem that is caused by tillage, amongst others, but that makes it more difficult to actually go on to the next step of growing the plants you want in there. Synthetics, that's another one that damages soil. Synthetic inputs are generally indiscriminate killers. So herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, they don't just kill the one thing we need to kill to prevent problems like a certain insect when it comes in to damage a crop, but it kills quite a few insects. And so we want to be careful to use our sides only when we need them, use them as a tool, not a rule. And then chemical fertilizers, another synthetic input, can weaken our natural resources, because the resources that are there that could fertilize our soil and do fertilize our soil for free, realize they don't have a job to do after the chemical fertilizer is put on. So a lot of times those biological creatures in our soil basically just go deeper into the soil so that they can find food and shelter. The other problem for degenerative soils and depleted soils is when we continuous graze or overgraze our pastures. So this is definitely not grazing, because you could play golf on that pasture right there. And the cows are overusing that space of shade. So they do a lot more damage to the soil, and it takes quite a bit to come back from this type of a problem. But regenerative agricultural practices can actually help you do that. So let's go back to glomalin, that crazy little word that is what we call soil glue, is glomalin. And it is a glycoprotein produced abundantly on hyphae and spores of arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi in the soil and in the roots. And there's a lot of really big words there, but we're only going to worry about glomalin and mycorrhizae, because the funguses do a lot of work for us in the soil. And this lady, Sarah F. Wright, discovered how glomalin and mycorrhizae interact in the soil and how important they are. So a woman discovered this. So that's another feather in our cap. I think it's basically attention to detail, as most of us do. But she was working for the Agricultural Research Service back in the 90s, and I believe she still does. I would like to shake her hand someday if I ever get to meet her. So this is why it's important. Aggregates are those little particles that should look, in really good soil, look like cottage cheese. And they need exudates. And exudates are I went back one, sorry. Exudates is the shiny stuff on the little roots. And those those aggregates need exudates to remain intact. And exudates are the sugars that come from the root of the plant after the plant collects the solar power, solar energy, it converts that solar power into energy for the plant to help it grow. And the exudate, which is the shiny part on this root, that is leaking out to shelter and feed the mycorrhizae. So sorry, I did it again. It provides food and water and shelter to the mycorrhizae fungi, which are these little white threads that you see all stringing across here. And they make a network. And if you can see that, they go from one root to the other and provide information and food and water to the roots themselves. And on this drawing, you can see the fungi from the mycorrhizae fungi coming into the plant root and attaching itself. And then they actually trade information as well as supplies and shelter. The problem with aggregates is that they only live for 27 days. So we want the mycorrhizae fungi to be plentiful and help the exudates to keep pumping from the root of the plant and keep providing glue to hold everything together. So the mycorrhizae and the aggregates and the exudates really are have a very symbiotic relationship. Now we're going to listen to a YouTube video from Cornell University that is talks about mycorrhizae.
A rainstorm will leave this forest flush with wild edibles prized by chefs and collectors.
Oh, great.
Chanterelle mushrooms have a rich and unique flavor, but their most crucial function lies out of sight. Beneath the flashy fruiting bodies, microscopic threads called hyphae extend throughout the soil.
Hyphae are common to all soil fungi, most of which are free-living decomposers of dead organic matter. But the chanterelles are among the many fungal species known as mycorrhizae. Their hyphae forming a partnership with the roots of plants.
Mycorrhizae assist the roots in obtaining water and nutrients, their thin hyphae reaching into tiny crevices in the soil as well as breaking down dead organic matter to obtain the nutrients locked inside, something that plants find difficult.
They exchange these nutrients for sugars created by the plant's photosynthesizing tissue above ground. The symbiosis greatly improves tree health, to the point where some seedlings need mycorrhizae to survive.
Far from just pine trees, almost all plants form symbioses with mycorrhizae. Mycorrhizae are extremely diverse, with some species forming intricate structures inside the very cells of the roots. They perform the same exchange of nutrients for sugars as all mycorrhizae, and, by joining multiple plants into a network, can relay messages between them.
When herbivorous spider mites start to feed on one of these bean plants, the signal goes out, prompting the other plants to ramp up defenses. The forewarned plants emit odors to attract predatory mites that devour the spider mites and protect all of the plants from further harm.
Mycorrhizae serve as a critical bridge between below-ground and above-ground ecosystems, sustaining the diversity of plants that humans and animals rely on, all the way from the biggest tree down to the smallest bean.
So that's what mycorrhizae in your plants should look like. The one on the left has lots of mycorrhizae, and the one on the right is without mycorrhizal fungi. So it does help a lot to have the mycorrhizae there, and some plants don't need it, like broccoli and some other cruciferous vegetables, but most other plants have and use mycorrhizal fungi, and some are very specific, like blueberries have their very own mycorrhizal fungi. So this is disturbance, and if you disturb the soil, you should feed it. Mycorrhizae do not like disturbances very much. They like to stay together because they're a colony. And so it takes about, if you would use the tractor as a disturbance, that would cause about 6 weeks of recolonization to tear up the soil that much. And you're also letting a lot of your carbon out of your soil by opening it up like that. So many farmers are figuring out that when they disturb the soil this deeply, they also must feed it. And so they're using compost tea or some other kind of fertilizer to feed the soil to help the mycorrhizae come back together as a colony. Now the picture on the right is still a disturbance with the cow eating the cover crops, but at least when she's eating the cover crop, then that cover crop is already there to help cover the soil and protect it and keep it at a good temperature. And also, as the cow eats the cover crop, then what goes in must come out. And so we have manure, and urine to help fertilize the soil. So just remember, if you disturb it, you must feed it. And roots in the soil can also do a lot of things for us. Continuous living roots or covers, like different kinds of plants, provide roots, and roots provide free eco services. And roots mine up nutrients from deep in the soil. So if we have different heights of plants, then we also have different lengths of roots. And that's where the biggest assistance comes in, when we have deep, deep roots that can bring up nutrients from deep in the soil. And roots also help us prevent erosion, and they hold moisture. So planting cover crops can provide roots of varying lengths. They feed the biology in the soil because they are mining up those nutrients from deep down, and they prevent erosion and hold moisture. So in a drought, you would have moisture remaining in your soil just because the roots are holding it there. And you can also prevent, I keep going the wrong way, prevent high soil temperatures. And that's pretty important when it's hot outside, especially because a canopy of cover crops can actually make the difference of 25 to 35 degrees in the soil. And when optimum growing temperatures are 55 to 65, 30 degrees can make a huge difference. This Dr. Stephen Gleisman kind of developed the FIST method for when we are getting ready to use tillage on our farms. He wants you to till no more than every 4 years. And that is a very good recommendation when you're trying to do regenerative practices, because like we talked about, disturbances are pretty hard on the soil. And then for intensity, he likes vertical till, which is not very deep. And also the scale, he doesn't want you to till all of your farm at the same time. So you could, if you're grazing and you want to refurbish a pasture or change what is growing there, then you would only till up part of it at one time. And so another way to look at that for you grazers out there, it would be similar to using the patch burn graze method. And then time of disturbance, as we talked about the bacteria waking up, we don't want them to eat our glomalins. So tilling in the winter could be a good way to try and do tillage. So now this brings us to grazing, and this is my favorite part because I love to graze, and my sheep are really good at it. So when you get professional grazing animals, it's pretty amazing what they can do. But this is not grazing, and this is a property that I go past quite often throughout the year, and this was May of 2016. And if you notice, all those cows are underneath that big tree. And you can see the grass is super short. So if it's super short on top, the roots are very short because plants tend to slough off their roots when there's no solar collecting leaves on top. So however tall the plant is, that's about the length that the roots will slough off at. So if you have a 4-inch plant, you're only going to have about 4 inches of roots. And they don't necessarily break off, but they can wither quite heavily. So another thing you can notice about this photo is that the pond is starting to recede and there's a lot of mud around the edges. So now I'm going to take you to October of 2020, and here's the same place. And back in 2018, the farmer cut down the tree, which is where that X is. He thought it was sucking all the water out of the pond. So that's why he cut it down. I was kind of amazed at that. And this line, the blue line, is about where the photo ended before. And the reason why I included more of this photo, more of the landscape in this photo, is that I wanted you to see the gully at the bottom of the arrow right here. That has been forming over the last 4 years because there's a great big hill to the left of this photo. And so the grass is very short up there as well. And so basically, because there's nothing to hold the soil, it has been, any rain that we've had has washed down and created this gully and washed it out. And that is the silt that is filling up the pond. So when you have short grass, you have short roots, and it cannot really hold your soil for you. So in 4 short years, and I want to go back to that picture so you have one more look at it. Here's what it looked in May of 2016. And that's what it is now, pretty much. But anyway, that's just kind of a reminder why you want to keep your grasses tall. Now here's what grazing should look like. This is Greg Judy's farm here in Missouri. And those cows are belly deep in all kinds of vegetation and forage. And they are some pretty happy cows. There was no mooing like there was, they weren't unhappy. And, you know, Temple Grandin talks about mooing, and you didn't hear that in this group. There was about 80 cows in here, and Greg Judy only wants the plants to be eaten down by 1/3 of their height. And that keeps them regenerative and continuing to come back so that these cows always have something to eat when they get to this paddock. And they move once a day, I believe, throughout the year. And if you're a plant person, you know that's Sericea lespedeza, and even the cows will eat it if it's nice and vegetative and green and lush like it was here. Those cows had very few flies on them because the grass is helping to keep the fly load down because the manure is down in the soil and not basically sitting out in the open. Flies can still get to it, but they just don't get a chance to lay eggs in it very fast because the manure is going away because there's so many dung beetles and other little creatures working on that manure and drying it out because they're helping to decompose it further. And then here are some goats. They were in a research project that I had, and we were growing cover crops for them. Goats like to browse, and so they like to eat with their head up. And because of that, we wanted to make sure we planted tall cover crops. There's some sorghum Sudan in there. We had some, I believe, some oats, some spring oats, and There was some clovers and some mung beans and several other plants in our cover crop cocktail. Now here's something you don't want to do, and I can show you this because these are my sheep several years ago when I was first learning to graze. You don't want to let your animals graze the crops down past 6 inches. And not only is it hard on your forage because it can damage the crowns of the grass, but you are also possibly reintroducing any parasites that might be living in your pasture, because parasites that are especially sheep and goat and, well, ruminant parasites, they can climb up on the grass and any of the stalks of the plants up to about 4 inches. And they swim in the dew until the sun dries out the dew for the day. And then they make their way back down into the crown of the plant to stay cool. So if you're allowing your plants to get short and stemmy like these are, but especially very short, your animals could be eating their parasites back and being recontaminated. So we got to be careful about that. So grazing and rest for your pastures and your paddocks is really super important. If you undergraze, you can get woody plants and lots more seed heads. And you overgraze, that could be detrimental to the crowns. You can reintroduce those parasites. So the other problem that you could get is that when the plant is about 3 inches tall or shorter, it also stops creating glomalin. And so that could cause a problem and cause a dieback of your plants, but it could also wake up bacteria and get more weeds growing that you don't really find desirable, and could cause some other problems as well. And your soil will not have anything to hold it together. So there's lots of ways you can look at that about undergrazing and overgrazing as you are going to plant cover crops, I hope. One way to get a good stand is to broadcast your seeds into your perennial pastures and then allow your animals to go in there and graze it down super short. And while they are grazing it, basically they are pushing those seeds into the soil so that you have really good seed to soil contact. So you can use it as a tool, but you probably will have to deworm these animals after this point. So if you're going to use that as a tool and not a rule to overgraze, then you have to be strategic about it and then check your animals. And we also want to have rest for our paddocks. That's super important. We want to make sure the grasses grow back to the tips. The tips should be grown back. We don't want to see bite marks after our animals are removed for 30 to 45 days of rest in the season, the growing season. And we want to wait as long as it takes to get that seed or that grass plant to come back to a point the way it should have. And then we always want to plan for stockpiles. So if you're not thinking about winter grazing all year long, how you're going to get to having stockpile left so that you can graze in the wintertime, you're probably not planning for the rest of your grazing year either. So you need to always think about how we can have enough grass for winter grazing. And sometimes you have to work up to it. It took me a couple of years to get to that point. But one of my goals was to always try to feed less hay or no hay at all. Now, cover crops can help you build your biodiversity, which just means lots of different kinds of plants And as you get lots of different kinds of plants, you're also helping your subterranean livestock as well as your above ground livestock. So when you get a biodiversity building up in plants and subterranean creatures, you are creating resiliency so that you can bounce back if something happens. If you have a flood or a bad storm or a tornado, your soil is still going to pay you back because it's resilient, and it will provide you with lots of free eco services. And some of those free eco services are that the mycorrhizae fungi will be feeding your plant roots. The roots will be mining up the plant available nutrients, which is super important because not all nutrients that we put on our soil, chemical type or even organic type, are available to the plants. But when the roots mine up their own nutrients from deep down, they actually are plant available for the most part. The other eco services we get out of using regenerative practices is that our water and our nutrient cycles are working. We actually get seeds for free. Greg Judy always told us, when I got to visit that one time, he was telling us that there are plants out here that I did not plant, and they were not here when we started grazing. And he was talking a lot about warm season grasses. And there were plants all over that he said he did not plant. And I was marveling at noticing how many different kinds of plants were there. But he said those were coming up for free from the soil because his soil was biologically active and was churning up those seeds from the old seed bank from who knows how long ago. Another great thing that we get as a free eco service is that when we have lots of forage on the ground for our livestock, we also will get predator insects and more pollinators, because now we are providing them with a food source and habitat. And when you get pollinators, you're likely to get predator insects. And when we have a lot of people complain about how many bad bugs there are. Well, the good news is that there are about 16 or 17 predator insects to every one bad bug. So you want to provide them with as much nourishment as possible. And also an abundant biodiverse pasture helps us grow great healthy animals. So going forward, if you would like to try regenerative practices, it's never too late to start. And I would ask that you try and just jump in. You can always try to frost seed winter hardy seeds over snow. And as our soils may not be the greatest yet, we might want to provide a better mineral for our livestock. And if you provide a mineral that is has more than 30% salt in it, you're limiting them to the minerals that they can get. So I would suggest 30% or less of salt, or even no salt, and provide them salt separately. Baking soda is another one that I provide for my sheep. And it can work as a rumen buffer, which is a good job for baking soda. But also, if you notice they attack baking soda when you first provide it, that might suggest that they need more minerals. So try and improve on your mineral packages. Planting cover crops and pollinator strips, or use cover crops that are flowering, is another way to have pollinators and predator insects. And also when you're planting cover crops, plant your summer mixture at the end of winter and plant your winter mixture at the end of summer. And for me in the Kansas City region, the end of winter is about February, the end of February, early March, and the end of summer, I would like to plant my cover crops for winter about the middle of August. And then if you have cash crops as well, you want to interplant those cover crops into your cash crops before you harvest them, so they have a good start to cover your soil and not leave it fallow all winter. And here's a fun way to know if your soils are becoming active. You could take the Soil Your Undies Challenge. And if you Google it, and I know you want to, you can find out how to do that challenge. So as long as you have soil resiliency and you get free eco services, who cares what you call it? Your farm will thrive. And here's a few resources that I use to make this presentation. And biologically active soil is healthy soil. So thanks for listening. And there's my contact information.
We do have some questions. First of all, thank you very much for a great presentation. We specifically had a couple. Thank you for the great demonstration with the flour and the bread, specifically to show us how important regenerative agriculture is. One of the questions that came in was, soil depletion is clearly important, and what's a good way to evaluate your land if you don't really know the history of it? Which maybe that Soil Your Undies is a way to find out more.
Right. It takes about 60 days to do the Soil Your Undies challenge, and that could tell you a lot. Just take a shovel out and turn over some spades full of soil. See if you have earthworms. Earthworms come after all of the other critters in there get started. So if you have earthworms, it's becoming more active. If you don't have any, you can cut like a 12-inch by 12-inch cube out of the soil, and you should turn that over and have a minimum of 10 earthworms in that block of soil. If you don't see that many, you probably need some regenerative practices. And the thing about regenerative is this is a lead up to being sustainable. We can't be sustainable until our soils are biologically active.
Excellent. Thank you. That's very helpful. So loved the comment, use the sides, the herbicides, the fungicides, etc., as a tool and not a rule. Do you have any helpful thoughts for when these are either most effective or vice versa, when we should definitely not be using these?
Well, that's, in my opinion, you probably shouldn't use them at all, because you're going to get all these free eco services from the soil when you're doing regenerative practices. But until you get to that point, then probably the best way to look at it is divide your farm up into sections and use the fist method, and don't do the whole farm at once. So if you have to spray something, if you've got a bad patch of a weed that is just not going away, then do part of it, and then don't use that spray on the whole farm. Other things to look at are find out what the plant is. And there's a great book called When Weeds Talk, and you can Google that and find it. And there's a list in there of each plant, a lot of common plants over the United States. And the author of that book, and I'm trying to think of his name right now, has gone to the trouble of finding out what each of those plants likes when it lives in the soil. And so it is living there and telling us why it is living there by growing. So if you can go in and look at his book, and it will tell you this plant likes poor calcium levels. And then there'll be a whole list of other things as well. And basically, if you do the opposite of that, then you can start mitigating that one weed. But I don't really recommend trying to get rid of one weed when I could send animals in there and graze all of it off and then put a cover crop on it. But yes, there are times when we could use the sides and make them work for a temporary solving of a problem.
Excellent. Thank you. So there was a question, one of your slides had, grass with a wider root and a dandelion with a longer taproot. So dandelions are actually helpful?
Yes, they are. And if you look in a lot of the really fancy commercial vegetable seed catalogs, they actually sell dandelion seeds because people grow it to make jellies and other kinds of dishes. So yeah, dandelions are actually healthy. They are actually trying to help you put more calcium in your soil.
All right. Good to know. Good to know. There was a question, is vertical till the same as no-till drill?
Very similar, but it actually is even shallower, I believe.
Okay. Let's see. There was a question about the species that the cattle were grazing in your picture, where the cattle were grazing some very tall pasture land. Was that an invasive species? Is that something we need to be concerned about?
No, actually, that is also a plant that you can get some different varieties. The wild varieties don't have as much tannin. They have more of a tertiary chemical in them that offends the noses of our ruminants. And so at certain times of the year, it's super bitter. But you can buy one, a Sericea lespedeza, that actually has a good high tannin level in it, and it's more palatable. So in the South, it is a very invasive weed because it becomes so woody and stemmy. So if you have animals that will graze it, that's one that you can graze down pretty hard and it comes back. It'll stay a little more lush, and just use it as as part of a pasture. You can use it as a high tannin feed, and it will help suppress parasites.
Excellent. Great. And then we've got one more question. Are there any USDA or other programs that assist with helping farms implementing regenerative agriculture?
Well, you can use cover crop programs and the EQIP program to get internal fencing. And I know that doesn't sound like that belongs to that question, but if you think about it, you make your paddocks smaller and your animals will graze them better, no matter how many you have. And so, yes, there are NRCS programs through EQIP that can help you buy cover crops. And they are pretty generous with the cover crop one because they usually let you pick out your mix within a certain range of seeds. And so you could do a lot with cover crops. And I would also recommend this book from SARE, SARE.org. This book will show you what each kind of cover crop plant can do. And if you go to the charts, which are on page 66, if I can get there, there's lots of charts and they'll tell you what each plant will do. And so then you can select wisely to mix your cocktail of seeds, and NRCS will do a cost share with you and pay for part of that.
Wow, that's some great information. Thank you very much. It looks like that's all the questions we have at this point. If there are any other questions, feel free to send those in, guys. But thank you so much for that presentation.
Well, thank you for letting me have this opportunity. And I hope I didn't put anybody to sleep at the last of the program here, but it's been a great run. I've watched almost all of the programs, so thanks for that.